Um, Good morning. It's a small group today, but we have a couple of people online and a couple of people here. And I was asked to cover the topic of civil disobedience and particularly talk about affinity groups. And I assume I know that that's because Peace and Social Concerns is interested in us being ready to defend our democracy. And when I say defend our democracy, I mean, use nonviolence to defend our democracy. And so what I did was to put together a very quick set of definitions of nonviolence. I don't know what other people's experience is with nonviolence, so but let me just quickly go through that and a little bit about my experience with nonviolence. Nonviolence seeks understanding and movement toward partnership with people. It seeks to defeat injustice and not people. So it doesn't really, it's not anti-anything. It's a positive, it calls for positive reverence for dignity in life and a constant effort to avoid participation in violence and dehumanization that results. And I think that what we're experiencing now is, in our country, is a level of dehumanization that is actually being carried on to some extent by two sides. We're really divided from each other, but mostly it's coming from people who are attempting to use lies and violence to affect what's happening in our lives. So, Gandhi and King, we can see as some of the major developers of nonviolence, and the way that we use it now as civil disobedience, used it to challenge unjust laws. And they did that through really well thought out campaigns, because campaigns in nonviolence have to be as thought out as military campaigns. And not everybody understands that automatically. It seems like something that we really have to think about that. So the campaigns that we know about in our history in the United States, the unionization was done with campaigns that were mostly nonviolent in the early part of the century. But the ones that we're most familiar with are the civil rights campaign, the anti-war work, the women's rights, nuclear weapons and nuclear power were both campaigns that used nonviolence. During the 80s, immigrant defense, things that had to do with Central Americans, mostly coming from war-torn nations, using nonviolence to defend their right to be here. The right to choose these days, many people are using nonviolence demonstrations to call for the right to choose, a right for women to choose their own health care. LGBTQT rights and more. All of these are done in community, and that I think is really an important part. And we, as a Quaker meeting, are a community. Now, the fact is that that you need a lot of different people doing a lot of different things to have a really good nonviolent campaign. And that's where affinity groups come in. There seems to be a movement, which I wasn't even aware of until I started Googling affinity groups, to form affinity groups within the workplace. that are often affinity groups that gather like-minded people, similar people, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, it's like women's what do we call them? What do we call them? Women's groups that got together and to talk about groups. What?
Identity groups?
I didn't hear you, Terry.
Identity groups.
Identity groups. Yeah, I guess. Anyway, the fact is but those groups are not what we're talking about here. And they also in the workplace, they've been accused of being things that divide people as opposed to things that bring people together. The kind of affinity group we're talking about is one that gets together to help each other in the course of a nonviolent campaign. And that group will not just be the people who might get arrested, who are actually going to sit down and do the action, but also the people who are going to support them. And the best example I have of that is a group of people the affinity groups that happened during the nuclear power movement, when this was very well developed both in England and in the United States. The opposition to nuclear power in the late 1970s, yes, I think late 1970s, early 80s, we took a lot of work. I don't know whether there was much in Texas, but there was on the East Coast and the West Coast. And both Terry and I were involved in groups then. And the one that I know best is Seabrook, which is in New Hampshire, a power plant that actually did get decommissioned as a result of the nonviolent demonstrations, which we used very careful affinity groups. Terry's had the same experience out in Oregon with the Hanscom power, nonviolent power plant, I think. That was the power plant, or it might have been a defense plant. I can't remember. Anyway, the point is that a group gets together and decides on a variety of roles. And that's the one piece of paper that I did print enough to distribute. So let me do that. And you'll see on here, there are a lot of roles involved. There's roles before an action, there's roles during an action, and then there's the roles. They don't always have all these roles, and people play two roles. So, yeah, people online. Steve is putting a list in the chat. Yeah, that's the page. I knew we wouldn't be able to see it well, but as you can see, every action requires a range of different tasks, and those tasks are taken by different people. Now, this is a very extensive list, and most of the time you don't have this kind of these many people, but you can see that it takes a lot of work to put on a campaign. There's got to be quite a bit of coordination involved. The campaign that it was really just a demonstration where I have my experience with using nonviolence successfully to limit violence was in 1970. We had what were they called? The May Day demonstrations in Washington against the Vietnam War. And I probably left that off. No, anti-war, yeah. The Vietnam situation was one where we really did build up a large group of people in this country who really opposed that war. partly because it was middle-class boys who were going over and being drafted, at least at the beginning of the war. And it was a senseless war, in my opinion. We never should have gotten involved, just as some of the other wars that we've been involved in since. But by May of 1970, it was pretty clear that the country was fairly divided around this issue. And Nixon was the president, and there was a planning for a really large demonstration in Washington. And so where I took part in that is that my Quaker meeting and other meetings got together, and we found people who would be marshals, would learn to how to lessen the violence, various ways that you can use to lessen the violence, which is really what nonviolence is all about. It's de-escalation of the violence, and in a positive way. And I was part of that. As you can see, I'm not a very large person. I had a husband who was much taller, much larger at that time, my first husband. But one of the other people with me was an older woman, meaning older. She was probably in her 50s at the time, not as old as I am now. And she was even slighter than I was at that point. And the three of us were part of this group, and there were others, but I just remember the three of us because when it came time to use the skills that we had, the three of us happened to be walking together, and it was not totally planned. But when we got in front of, got not in front of the White House, but they had the White House blocked off Lafayette Park, facing the White House, and they had buses around the White House with this is our President Nixon at that point. They had buses lined up around Lafayette Park, which were protecting the White House, and then some folks from the demonstration got up on top of the bus and started hollering, push over the buses, push over the buses. And we knew that it would be a result would be violence if those buses got pushed over. And so quite amazingly, we turned around and locked arms and surrounded those buses with people. And kept other people from going in and getting to the buses. And it just quieted everything down. People started marching again, and they didn't try to get into the buses. I'm not sure what would have happened, but there definitely were, military people on the other side of the buses, and I think it would have been a really violent situation if not. It was pretty amazing to have that happen. And I just remember locking arms with my husband on one side and this little old woman on the other side and thinking, anybody could overrun us. But because the whole line was very clear and quiet, we went quiet. There was a lot of hollering, and then it slowly stopped. So de-escalation is a lot of what nonviolence is about. So to bring us up to date, I think it's interesting that one of the things that Quakers are doing today, and that we might all want to think about how we would react, is working at the polls, or just being there and voting when you're voting, and making sure that people aren't feeling threatened by people who want to prevent them or discourage them from voting. And so I did put on the list of links a suggestions for de-escalation. And an entire, actually, let me find it here. A training that people have been doing, an active bystander intervention, de-escalation training, that you could go through before you go to the polls, if you haven't already gone to the polls. So I know a lot of us have voted already, and we have. But the idea is to rehumanize the parties involved, particularly the person being harassed, and to diffuse the situation and to unleash the constructive power of the person being harassed, rather. So you're harnessing their power. Your intervention should give a sense of agency to that person and should not hinder their ability to respond or guide the response. So that you're giving them you're helping them to have their own power to vote, but also to nonviolently deal with the person who's harassing them. And it takes a lot of work to be able to be present in that way. And it's usually not something you should do by yourself. I occasionally do get into a situation where you need to try and do this by yourself, but usually you don't want to do it by yourself. So, and there's a really nice abbreviation of what you should do. First, you should center yourself, which I think as Quakers we do know how to do, and then listen for feelings and what values are being expressed, and then acknowledge, ask questions, basically, acknowledge the feelings and experiences, and then respond by offering open-ended or choices of questions, and then further, just try to add positive things to the discussion, if you can get people into a discussion. But mostly you want to make sure that the person being harassed feels that they have some people behind them, doesn't feel like they're all alone. So I'm wondering about any of you and whether you've had any experience in any demonstrations using nonviolence. Elizabeth, have you done any?
Zero. With violence or nonviolence? No, I've had no experience at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Mitch, have you been to demonstrations? About anything? Mitch?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's a big room.
I've been on marches.
You've been on marches.
And, going back to when I was in college.
Have you experienced any occasions on those marches or anything?
No, they were all very peaceful, routine.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, when we had the Boston Center for Peace and Justice, we had a Million Musicians March, which was very well attended, actually. It was against the Iraq War, and we didn't have a million musicians, unfortunately, but we had probably 100 musicians marching through the streets. And I can't, there was a particular day that we did that. Larry, did you participate in those? Yes. The Million Musicians Marches that happened in the 90s and in the 2000s, just after the Iraq War. Sorry. Did you play it? I don't know what.
This was the first I've heard of the Million Musicians March.
Okay. Huh. Do you remember those, Terry?
Oh, yeah. The picture I keep using for my mug shot was taken, on
that's right.
Social media and stuff was taken at the march. I was carrying Jackson's mandolin.
Right. Jackson is Andre Bean's son, and he came to be in the march, and then I can't remember why you ended up with the mandolin, but you did. I think he felt like he didn't want to continue to carry the mandolin, or maybe he had another instrument with him.
Well, I didn't want to bring any of my instruments generally are too big to carry around for a long time, at least for me these days. So I borrowed Jackson's mandolin now and then. So, there was no violence there. The first, I was in some picket lines for Congress of Racial Equality in Dallas, and we did have confrontation, but it was all from cars. So they didn't stick around long enough to employ any kind of interaction. They would just drive up and shout obscenities at us. In terms of violence from kind of external violence, internal violence, I don't think I've ever encountered any in a demonstration. In the civil rights movement, that was an era in which demonstrators were regularly attacked by police and by thugs. And Vietnam marches in larger communities sometimes had counter demonstrators. And of course, in certain instances, there was police violence. But I was never around for those things. The violence, that is, marches, yes. The anti-nuclear power movement would be occasional counter demonstrators, but really aggression was not typical at all. So we may be entering an era which is, I don't think we should assume bad things in advance, but I'm afraid that we're entering an era that's going to look a lot more like the civil rights movement than it did the other movements I was a part of. It was an era in which there was real danger of serious physical injury and harm, and arrest and all that stuff. So it's, I'm getting a certain sense of deja vu about this, and I think we really need to take seriously the need to revisit what was being taught in those civil rights training sessions and so on about not only, how to behave nonviolently, but how to protect yourself from injury in a situation in which you're the victim of aggression like that.
Yeah, we're discussing, Daniel, our experiences with whether we've ever had an experience of being at a march or something where there was some altercation. So it's an interesting, because I've been at peaceful demonstrations, except for that one in Washington, which was really had the potential of being quite dangerous. Mostly I've been around people who have, I've been in lots of demonstrations, but, and the first demonstration that I was ever in was against the Chase Manhattan Bank in New York City, and at their headquarters. And it had something to, it had to do with South Africa. the investment of South Africa. This was in the 60s. And I got home from that to find out that my parents had been, I don't know what they were doing at a demonstration when my mother was pregnant in 1947 in front of the Chase Manhattan Bank. But she told me that I was almost, she was almost run over by a police horse. And that's my experience. The horses are really scary if the police come with horses. But I don't think the police don't tend to ride horses around here. So that's helpful. So the horse is such a big animal that it kind of intimidates me. I guess I should get used to horses. But I've only been arrested once, and that was before those 2 weeks before those 1970 demonstration, when I was at a prayer service in Lafayette Park when it didn't have buses around it, with people like Ralph Abernathy and Dr. Spock, and we were praying, and they decided, I guess Nixon said, go arrest all those people. Because we were right across from the plan was for all those religious leaders to go to try to get into the White House to talk to Nixon, and they were really, significant religious leaders in this country, bishops and things like that. And suddenly the police were coming and arresting us all for being in a peaceful demonstration in Lafayette Park. And, if Dr. Spock was getting arrested, I was going to get arrested too. So, but in that case, my husband stood out. He did not get arrested. And so he was part of the people who bailed us out. So that's my only experience with arresting, which of course is what often happens to people who are committing civil disobedience, basically. And you usually cooperate with the police when they come to arrest you, although some people will go limp when they, as an act of nonviolence. And that a lot of that is happening in Washington right now around the women's right to choose. There are lots of people have been arrested, and they've been arrested around the climate change stuff. Our friend Jane Fonda was doing every Friday, right, in Washington. Larry, you were there when I was there, weren't you, Larry?
I was, yes, at FCNL. At FCNL.
Yeah, FCNL. When we were there for an FCNL meeting, Jane Fonda was at the Supreme Court, right? She was demonstrating, I don't remember, or maybe
I was preoccupied with the convention.
Say it again.
I was preoccupied with the convention.
You mean the
I do recall Jane Fonda being arrested several times in Washington.
And our friend Lon Burnham, who's a Quaker up in Fort Worth, got arrested with her that week. Oh. So yeah, it's sort of, that's I think why I remember it. The other thing that nonviolence, in looking at what Quakers are doing around the country, and I think it's worth looking at, the group in New York has developed a Quaker deep listening, deep canvassing, deep components of Quaker deep canvassing. It's where they're going from house to house, and basically just saying that they're a Quaker volunteer, and they're talking together with people today because they're deeply worried about the political polarization in this country. And they've developed a little, I put this on the list of things, links, because I thought it was kind of interesting. There's a very nice little video with the training that they have up there. And they're basically trying to draw out people's thoughts about the polarization. Now, of course, New York, we always think of New York as completely blue, you know, completely, you know, kind of, you know, but there are lots of people in New York who are, you know, even MAGA people in New York. And so they've been going around in their own neighborhoods and never completely alone. That's really important. But they've been asking people about what they think about our democracy and what's happening with our democracy, and not disagreeing with them, but rather trying to draw out their stories and telling draw out the stories of the people they're talking to, and also tell their own stories about how. Now, I don't have any relatives that I have that have, you know, those inclinations, and I don't know whether any of you do, but it would be worth looking at this little training kind of thing as a way to get some idea of how to talk to those relatives at Thanksgiving and Christmas and stuff like that. So I have a sheet here for people who are here because you wouldn't be able to get to it online while we're talking. But this is on the links.
I just talked to my MAGA's sister last night, and she was inviting me to Thanksgiving, and I'm debating on whether I'm going to go or not, because I don't want to get into it. You know?
Well, and I wonder whether we want to do some of this this listening kind of thing, training here at the meeting, because that's something that I think Quakers deeply believe, that there's some of God in everyone. And we do need to be able to talk to those people that, especially in our family, that don't agree with us. And that this polarization really is potential violence in this country. So I don't know whether we want to arrange that, but this little training on which you can go to online, active bystander intervention and de-escalation. The whole idea is de-escalation of the tension between people, and trying to find things we can talk to each other about. Trying to find ways in which we are actually all, feeling some of the same things. It's hard with all the lies that seem to be happening, but they believe that we're being lied to too. So it's a matter of talking to each other about our stories and how we see things. And I do believe that we can talk to each other. Terry and I have a hard time sometimes agreeing that that's the case. But I'm wondering if we really want to organize something in the meeting about that. Because I think it sounds like at least two of you have that. You know, I don't know, Larry, do you have relatives that you can't?
Just the format here is very much like canvassing protocols. However, in canvassing protocols, there's always an action at the end of it that you ask the interlocutor to engage in. What's the action here?
There isn't one. It's just, and I wonder about that. So, because I think it would really work if the action were to have a party together or do something together, because I think that's the way we learn to be with each other better. So, you can look at the thing online, and I think it would be,
I think you do have to ask some hard questions about what one's expectations of these kinds of activities would be. I think at a minimum, you expect some human interaction, perhaps to build some modicum of trust. I'm not sure that we can get anything more than that out of it. That maybe make it worth doing, but it seems like the common experience with people on that side of the political spectrum is A, they don't believe anything you would tell them because you're deluded by a corrupted mass media. And they will pose their versions of facts, which they are simply unpersuadable about, simply a fact that Biden stole the election. And, you know, if I truly believed that the election had been stolen, well, I might have been storming the gates of the Congress. I might have been. I don't know. I can at least understand if your version of reality is so that far off track, why they would behave in the way they do. But until there's some willingness to engage in the possibility that their version of reality might not be totally accurate, then dialogue can only go so far. I do think it's worthwhile to somehow build understanding and trust no matter what, but I would not have high expectations of change out of such engagements.
I mean, I feel like I've just skimmed the surface because it's such a large issue. The other thing is that I've been involved with Alternatives to Violence program, which is basically it's training that is done both in the prisons and the community, which training in nonviolence and using nonviolence. And I think a lot of this has to do with that, the use of and a lot of that is listening as opposed to telling. A lot of that is looking to find common ground and to understand that, you know, each of us has some of God in us, or whatever you want to call it. Some in Alternatives to Violence, it's each of us has some good in us, and as well as admitting that everybody has the opposite too, the evil in them too. And there's no denying that human beings have that, but it's a matter of bringing out the good. And it's a little like what we do in Friends Committee on National Legislation lobbying, which is to try and find the commonalities and make relationships with people so that we can talk to them even if they're Ted Cruz, and even if they're John Cornyn. So, and we can talk to them without being oppositional, but yet tell them our truth and let them tell us their truths too, because sometimes their truths open our eyes to things that we didn't understand before. So, but this present polarization, I think we need skills to deal with it. Anyone else who has?
Yeah, I think one reason the dialogue is often fruitless is that there are trigger words that cause automatic responses. Recently I started an ad campaign on Amazon to sell my book. And the way it works is I provided a list of 150 keywords that if someone on Amazon types in one of those keywords, they'll get an ad for my book. And what I found when I'm interacting with MAGA people is that there are certain keywords that if I utter those keywords, they go off on a tangent. It's like there's a little repository of factoids that they have that are triggered by a particular keyword, and it may have nothing to do with what I'm talking about. I might say, well, we should wait until the situation evolves. And suddenly they're off on a rant about evolution is just a theory, and it has no credence. And 97% of scientists say that it's not a law, it's a fact. You know, and I'm saying, wait a minute. I was talking about this situation here. I wasn't talking about evolution. And that happens over and over again. That apparently it's almost like my interlocutors are AI devices. All they're listening for are keywords, and then they go off on some rant or the other in response to a particular keyword. So I think something like this, where there aren't any prepackaged triggering words, it's possible that you might be able to have a human interaction. I won't say a dialogue, but a human interaction. Because they haven't had pre-programmed in them keywords with regard to something like this.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the Quaker call to action is calling us to get ourselves prepared and to do this kind of training with each other. And I think you're right, Larry. Yeah, I do think that it works if you really are prepared to listen and to ask questions as opposed to telling things. But you know, I don't know whether the meeting is interested in something like that. I think that's a Peace and Social Concerns Committee, I think, is considering how we might do that. As Quakers, we don't move very fast. I'm afraid this Thanksgiving and Christmas we probably won't be prepared, but it would be interesting for people to look at the materials that I put into the links. I guess we can put the links up somehow on the website with the video of this, if the video of this is worth looking at. I'm not sure it is. What?
Just one quick thought. Okay, so nonviolence is about dialogue in this kind of thing, building understanding. It's also about resistance and nonviolent techniques of resisting either corrupt authority or, you know, violent insurgencies. And you know, I think we need to start doing some thought experiments of placing ourselves in Nazi Germany. When the SS is coming for your Jewish friends, what do? Do you hide them? Do you stand in the door? Do you operate as a clandestine group to try to create some kind of underground railroad? Just, you know, practical things, because we may be facing these kinds of things. And we're not just, I think you approach, whether it's the Nazis or anyone else, with this nonviolent Quaker understanding of that of God and everyone, but you also have to be prepared to resist, to stop the violence, to stop to stop the oppression. And it's been a long time since we've had to really think about that. And it's not too early.
No, it's not too early. Sort of. One of the things that one of these resources, the one that's active bystander intervention, has a scenario at a polling station with a line of voters, and you see an individual with a MAGA hat comes wandering slowly up and down the line, and they're basically saying, you know, you know who to vote for and make this country great. Don't get tricked by these liberal AOC Democrats. And that basically, that's the kind of thing I really worry about at the poll. Probably not in Austin, but in other parts of Texas. So, but we really need to close now, I'm sorry to say, because people are wandering in, and we need to close, and maybe we can have a moment of silence as we settle in for worship. So, thank you. Yes.